Hello and welcome to the ITFA podcast series. This week I'm in Lagos at GTR West Africa, along with several members of the ITFA Africa Regional Committee and also the TF COP task force. And so while the conference was on, I used the opportunity to grab several of them and get an update on where we are with some of the main sandboxes, some of the main initiatives, and how both the Africa Regional Committee Working Group and the TF COP task force are taking shape. I start off with John Jogren Hansen, the coordinator of the TF COP task force, and Hannah Anaba, the chair of the Africa Regional Committee.
So it's been a really interesting journey so far. I mean, of course, been focusing on what can we actually do for the members who joined TF COP. And we had some great ideas around developing business ideas, setting up some working groups that could sort of structure what we were talking about. And I'm very happy to say that while we've been here in Lagos, we've also had the opportunity to launch one of the initial business ideas that came up. So to answer your question short, set up 5 working groups, including the Africa Regional Council, which was already established. We'll set up 4 more: the regulatory working group, the sustainability working group, the insurance working group, and the FX Forex working group. Besides that, we're working on the sandboxes, and the one I wanted to mention for Lagos especially is where we identified a need to set up an invoice registry. It was initially an idea developed by Monetico. Always struggle with that, and really a need that was aired by the Central Bank of Nigeria and the financial sector, the banking industry in general.
I think the African Working Group works great in parallel with TF COP because what it allows us to do is actually work with the practitioners. So as we're developing all of these ideas and we have all of these initiatives running, we can actually work directly with the people who are concerned with the outcomes of this. So I think the invoice collateral registry is a good example. So we have developed this, but we were able to invite some of the participants in the working group to be in the room because ultimately they would be the ones to benefit from it. So having them being in the room, contributing to the ideas at the beginning, I think is what really we wanted to achieve overall as TF COP and also as the ITFA ARC working group. And I think since then we've had so many new participants, new conversations, and as we are working on some of these projects, new ideas are coming up and it's coming directly from the practitioners. This is exactly what we're trying to achieve with TF COP and as the ITFA ARC working group.
But I actually think that's the strength. So yes, the working groups sounds very silo focused, but they're actually not.
Yep.
For example, we had the first launch of the sustainability working group on Monday, and there were already spillovers to the regulatory working group, which we'll have next week. So and these are practitioners, some from same organizations, which of course work in different departments but work together.
Yep.
And I actually think the meeting we had on Tuesday at the central bank is exactly a great example where we can bring resources together. We can we can initiate this as an industry, which individual companies would not have been able to do.
Absolutely. I mean, so for example, the Africa Working Group, a lot of the initiatives that will be under the insurance, for example, or even those sustainability would fall under. So having the insights, I guess the TF COP bringing everybody together, all of us being aware of what these institutions are trying to push, how that impacts what everybody else is doing is really important because we're all trying to kind of bring down these silos. But ultimately, trade is connection, right? Everything needs to work together. Collaboration is one of the key things that we keep saying that we're trying to achieve. And trade is a great way to do that. And so I actually see them working really well. And I guess the real benefit of having the working group is where the responsibility is. We're all concerned with the outcome, but who is driving the next step? Who is driving the next project? And I think that's really what the difference to the working group space. But we all work for creation together because they're all concerned with the outcomes or benefit from the outcomes.
Because I've been wondering, why do people invest so much time? Because we actually do have a lot of meetings. We have a lot of input. We coordinate things. But I actually see it, or the companies see it as their business development. They get to tap in to experts from all sides of the industry, from different sectors, from different departments, be it multilaterals, be it law firms, be it insurance companies, and they can actually bounce off business ideas. and sharpen their business idea even further.
And I think all of us have been talking about the trade finance gap for a really long time. I'm very encouraged by how, as you mentioned, people are actually volunteering their time because it's actually important to our actual daily business. And so I guess my message would be for everyone to be as involved as possible. Because really what we've been saying is that if you're not at the table when the solutions are being created, then you are going to be not happy with what happens ultimately. And we want everyone to be involved because we want everyone to actually benefit from all the things that happen within TF COP and with it. And I think the group has been very welcoming. A lot of people have invested a lot of time and resources, and we're really keen to see how this scales for us to reach our very ambitious goals.
That was Johnny Hansen, Head of Operations at the TF COP Task Force, and Hannah Anaba, Head of the African Regional Committee and also lead of the ARC Working Group. While I was in Lagos, I also hoped to speak with Ian Milne from Money to Go to find out more about his trade invoice registry. That was the event that we all attended right at the beginning of the week, but I'm glad to say I managed to track him down, and here he is. So thanks very much, Ian, for joining us to tell us a bit about your work.
No, great to catch up, Ted, as always. And sorry we couldn't do this in person in Lagos, but as you're aware, it was pretty hectic, right?
It was. There were so many things, but it all kicked off. There was GTR Lagos, but it all kicked off, of course, with this event at the central bank. So what was that all about?
Yeah, I mean, look, again, you quite rightly alluded to TF COP, and obviously, as part of the work we're doing at the Africa Regional Committee with ITFA, we're focused on how we can address the funding gap for SMEs, and we're looking for initiatives that can help close that gap. Now, the MDBs are very much pushing factoring as a key tool to close liquidity for SMEs. An invoice registry, which enables SMEs to effectively de-risk their receivables, which is their collateral, is the only collateral they have, is something we see as a essential building block in that regard. So through the factoring working group in Nigeria, which is chaired by the central bank, I reached out to set up this meeting. We managed to get 16 banks, credit unions, the National Collateral Registry, the Revenue Service, as well as obviously participants from the NDBs, all in the room, which I think we had about 70 participants, including those online. So obviously significant interest from the community there.
Absolutely. I mean, it was literally standing room only by the end of that amazing discussion. I must say, I was really struck by just really interesting feedback. For me, a lot of it was technical and specific, which suggested to me that people could really see the value of it. And even one or two of the skeptical voices, we afterwards discovered that they were very actually pro this. They just really wanted to make the point that there were certain issues to be addressed. So overall, I was quite impressed by the feedback.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure what engagement I expected. Obviously, I've done this with various markets across the globe, really, and sometimes people are super enthusiastic, sometimes not. We had a 3.5-hour session, and then obviously some bilateral discussions subsequently. And you're quite right, there was so much positive feedback. Obviously, the usual objections and questions on how this will work, but I think they were addressed. And broadly speaking, we've got buy-in from pretty much everyone that was in the room.
That's fantastic. Well, what are the next steps anyway? That's definitely something we discussed at the end of that event. And I know you've had some follow-up meetings since.
Yeah, so sort of next steps we said is obviously this is a TF COP initiative. So the aim of this is to go back to the various stakeholders there to say, okay, look, we have a concrete, I hesitate to call it a sandbox because this is actually something live and tangible, but we have something that the central bank wants to proceed with, that we think this can really help address a problem. SME liquidity, female businesses, financial inclusion, it ticks all the right boxes. So the central bank is going to request support for this initiative, which we obviously will present to the TF COP stakeholders. And then there's a hope that we can take this forward quickly, because what we don't want to do is lose momentum. We've had a great session with virtually everybody that's involved in the ecosystem. We now want to take this forward. And the belief I have from talking to CBN is that they're committed to that as well. They've already contacted me. They're doing some internal training on factoring, what regulations they might need to put in place, and an invoice registry as part of that. So I'm also going to be presenting virtually to their training course as well. So there's definitely really solid engagement and a drive and an urgency to deliver something on this fairly quickly.
That's great. Well, it really gets to the heart of what TF COP is all about. And this is definitely one of the leading sandboxes. And as part of the African Regional Committee, we're very proud of that. There are several African initiatives in there as well. In fact, next up, I'm going to have a look at George Wilson and his FI Trade 3.0. So thanks very much for joining us, Ian.
No, thanks, Ted.
And also, really good luck going forward. I'll check in with you again later on.
Thank you.
And so to our final interview with George Wilson from ARM, who's going to talk about FI Trade 3.0. A radical new approach to plug the gaps between the traders, their banks, the DFIs, the private sector in the middle, and to unlock liquidity. I caught up with George in Lagos and started by asking him to tell me, in a nutshell, what is FI Trade 3.0?
Really, the way to think about this is as a big machine.
Yeah.
Which is the intention of that machine is to take billions of dollars of global and African capital from investors, institutional investors, pension funds, insurers, and channel all of those dollars down to the layer of hundreds of billions of SME invoices across 54 countries and
hundreds of billions, literally.
Literally hundreds of billions. The point is that there's this sea of invoices that we need to attach. That is SME trade. Is attaching credit to all of those billions of invoices. And the way that we can achieve that is through the schema, and we funnel all of that global capital in dollars down to all of those invoices in local currency, in euros, and the way that we achieve that is through this aggregation layer system, where we use the SMEs as aggregators of all of their invoices. We use the local African financial institutions as aggregators of all of those SMEs, and then further up the chain, larger international financial institutions and regional financial institutions and sovereign ministries of finance, central banks as aggregators of the aggregators of the aggregators. And you can see how that all solves the mathematical complexity of all of these billions of invoices. And we use that as a machine to shape African SME trade finance into something that those global and African investors can get their hands around, and actually becomes investable.
And I guess the core part of the structure is the local FIs, as you said. So the tier 2, tier 3 banks, they deal directly with the SMEs. They know them. So ultimately, is it a bit like taking trade finance risk on banks that you trust? And it's their KYC and their track record. You're not so concerned with the actual underlying individual invoice.
Yeah. So the intractable problem has been this massive complexity and currency risk. And that's really what's prevented any real progress, to be honest. International investors and DFIs and the whole trade finance industry has tried to repurpose project finance and large scale debt from a sort of surrogate direct lending methodology. And that just simply doesn't work and cannot work when you're dealing with hundreds of millions of SMEs. The only entities that can really deal with those SMEs and touch them and give them trade credit are the local financial institutions, the local banks, the local trade financiers. And we're really empowering them with liquidity, with missing liquidity, in order to give them, in order to make this work. And that, of course, becomes FI trade.
Yes.
Which has, phenomenal, it not only solves the mathematics, it also has a phenomenal credit profile that you're dealing actually with the risk of regulated financial institutions in a very wholesale approach. that's something that there's a good deal of empirical credit evidence around, and we can leverage that with the investors in order to understand that it's not as risky as they might imagine.
No, absolutely. And I think the great thing is you can pool the risk, because I think this is always the thing with SMEs. If you can get a big enough group of SMEs pooled together in an efficient way, then you can estimate your risk and you can actually do the financing. Otherwise, it's just too many small bits of risk to try and assimilate.
Yeah, that and there are a few sort of perennial problems. One of them is exactly that, is concentrating and pooling the risk together in an acceptable format, which disaggregation layering achieves. It also solves the perennial problem of FX. Rather than macro high-level hedges and swaps, which can be very expensive, 15 and 20%, make the economics, impossible. We're able to use the aggregators, African banks. We're able to use their treasuries, who are of course perfectly placed as authorized dealers with direct access to the central bank's windows, FX windows. On a micro level, they match every single asset and liability, including all of these SME invoices. And that achieves a perfect solution that has up until this point really been kind of intractable. And so you solve that complexity. You also solve the FX problem. It gives a sort of roadmap for people, for everyone, all parties, to understand how it all fits together. And how to navigate,
and where you fit in. I think that's the big thing. Where do you fit into the big picture?
Where you fit in, and one thing that I've missed out, which is actually super important, are the DFIs. And we're talking about African financial institutions and empowering African institutions. The DFIs are key in this process, and they're part of the schema. And they apply catalyzing risk management, really. That's what starts the gravity well to pull all that capital down.
Absolutely.
And at scale. That's the other important point about this. This is a very scalable solution. Of course it works, and it was designed for Africa, but it's equally applicable in Latin America, Southeast Asia.
And is that what you're going to be focusing on in TF COP? Because how are you driving this forward now in TF COP? Is there a sandbox for this now in the top?
Yeah, so there's a sandbox for the ARN Trade Finance Fund. That's exactly what it's designed to do. And building out across 26 countries in Africa. We've come up with a very innovative solution that unlocks that liquidity. And of course, it also unlocks the $2 trillion worth of investable dollars that are currently being invested in government bonds in Africa.
Wow, that shows you've got very high sights here. $2.5 trillion. That's definitely something to unlock.
So it works very very well from the FX perspective, solving the scale and complexity. But the other important feature is how scalable this is, and we don't have to invent any new infrastructure, no new products, no new credit lines, no new relationships. All of the infrastructure already exists. It's just a different way of looking at it.
Well, that wraps it up for us here in Lagos. Thanks for joining us. Great to get an update on the TF COP task force and the ARC working group. I'll be keeping tabs on both of them over the coming months, and hopefully we'll catch up with them on the road later in the year. If you have ideas for topics that we can cover in our podcast, please let us know. You can check out the other podcasts in the ITFA podcast channel. And thanks for joining us.